Welcome to Milgard Hall and to UW Tacoma. I'm Sheila Edwards-Lang, and I am the chancellor here at UW-T. I want to thank everyone for making time to come out and celebrate this incredible partnership that we have. Before we begin, I want to do a special acknowledgement to Connie McCloud and Ramona Bennett from the Puyallup tribe. They're elders, and Ramona is a former council chair. We appreciate the partnership. We appreciate you making time to be here with us. You know, at UW-T, thank you. At UW-T, we have a tradition of starting our events with reading the land acknowledgement, which is where we acknowledge that we are on the traditional homeland of the Puyallup people. And today's ceremony, I'm not going to do that because the entire program is about celebrating that partnership and trying to figure out ways as we move forward that we can make this land acknowledgement a living, breathing commitment on the part of the university. So when you go out, you'll be able to see the beautiful plaque that was designed, carved, and painting, and you'll learn more about that later on in the program by members of the Puyallup tribe, others here in Washington, First Nations communities on Vancouver Island. So this is truly a collaborative partnership. The words on the plaque read, "The University of Washington Tacoma campus is located on the lands of the Puyallup people. The campus, including this building here, Milgard Hall, is located near the Puyallup Village site, Winding River." And the acknowledgement that we read before most of our events, we speak of the history of dispossession and forced removal of Indigenous people and our continued commitment as a university to social justice and partnership with Indigenous populations. So when we do that, we're acknowledging the past, but we're also acknowledging the present and the future of what we'd like to see here at our university. And in order to get to that imagined future, there are some concrete actions that we have to take as a university community going forward. Specifically, how are we going to make these partnerships real? How are we going to make these words real? And what are we going to do to uphold sovereignty and self-determination? And I'm honored that Sherry Burdine, who is our tribal liaison for all three campuses, is here with us. And you'll hear later from Gabe, our campus tribal liaison. But she's going to be doing some work with all of the campus leadership around sovereignty and training all of our deans and senior leadership on all three campuses so that we all have a better understanding of what tribal sovereignty is and what our responsibility is as leaders to make sure that we are living up to that. From the ground up, this building is designed around collaboration. It houses our business school, our School of Engineering, and our Global Innovation and Design program. When you look at the timber history display, and we're going to have time afterwards to do that, I ask you to reflect on the present and future of our relationship. And for those of you in the university, what are we doing to make sure that we have relationships not only with the Puyallup, but with all Coast Salish people? So I take great pride in knowing that UW Tacoma is a place where we can learn about our history and we can all take part in building that better future together. It's my pleasure now to introduce you all. He probably needs no introduction because he served as chancellor before I did. And he is the immediate past chancellor of UW Tacoma. And he was the chancellor when this project was started. And, you know, being a chancellor, you got a big job. There's a lot of other things that you could do. But one of the things that Mark took particular interest in was this partnership with the Puyallup tribe and making sure that we had this timber display, that if we were going to talk about the cross-laminated timber and the history of timber, that we told the full story. So many of you know that he has worked tirelessly over many months, even years, to make sure that what we're celebrating today took place. And I don't know about you all in the history. I'm still relatively new here. I see Michael Sullivan also, who was part of that. But the two of them were persistent and relentless in getting this done. And Mark, I see him in the halls, and he's like, I got one more thing for you to do. So he's going to come and talk about these displays and the process. But can you all join me in giving Mark Pagano just a warm applause to thank him for his incredible effort. Thank you, Mark. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, could you talk some more about me, Chancellor? No, thank you for those kind words, Chancellor Lang, and also thank you for being here with us today on this important day, and thank you for being our Chancellor. It's a difficult job, as you know. Appreciate it. Also, I would like to thank our co-sponsors today, too. We had two co-sponsors, not one, but two. First of all, we had the Office of Community Partnerships, so thank you, Julia and Carly, for all the background work, and thank you, Dr. Medeiros, for overseeing that office. Also, we have the Office of Equity Inclusion. We had Gabe and Elevie helping us behind the scenes, and you're going to hear more from Gabe earlier. So thank you to our partners today, our sponsors. And then, as Sheila said, this was quite a partnership in putting this together. So I'm going to first welcome the partners, and I would like you to either raise your hand or stand up so we can identify you. And the problem with doing this is I know I'm going to leave somebody out, so hopefully I can catch you if I left somebody out. But as Sheila said, my first partner was a local historian and historical preservationist, Michael Sullivan. He's here. You're going to hear from him second. Thank you, Michael. He was involved with this from the get-go. And then our primary partners were the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. And the Puyallup Tribe helped us in so many ways. So I'm just going to go through a couple of the areas. First of all, the Cultural Center that Connie heads up, and I'll talk a little more about that. And also Clinton is in the Cultural Center. The Communications Department helped us all along the way, and they're here today. Historic Preservation, Charlotte Bash was one of the first people I met with after talking to Connie about this. Brandon Raynon. In the Language Department, they're here in force today. There's probably about 10 people from the Language Department. I worked with Amber Hayward and Zalmai Zahir. And then artists that work for the tribe, Michael Hall. He is the carver that built the beautiful paddles out there on the front and the plaque. You're going to hear from him out after this program today. Also, he was assisted by William Johnny and Yelksy. And then Jack George was the artist who painted the words that Sheila talked about on the land acknowledgement. So thank you, Jack. Jack couldn't be here today. The Washington State Historical Museum was our partner from the get-go. We have a representative from the museum here today. Jennifer could not be here. Also, the Whatcom Museum and Jeff Jewell, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. And then we had several local artists, Heidi Bowden, who I just saw come in, John Tilzak, right there, also Claudia Ridner, right there. And you'll hear from them out in the display afterwards. They're going to hopefully be able to stay, and you can ask them questions about their specific work. Also, we had a non-local artist, and I'll tell you about her a little bit later, Deborah Reed from Santa Fe. Forterra helped us at the beginning. They worked on the fourth part of this presentation and helped us with a lot of the narrative about the future of cross-laminated timber. And then, of course, the Chancellor's Office and the Office of Advancement helped us all along the way. We couldn't have done this without their help and guidance. And then the architect of this building, the constructor, the architect was ARO, the constructor was Anderson Construction. Studio Matthews was the graphic arts firm that helped us lay out the display once we got all the material collected. And UW Capital Projects, Jennifer, I think, is here as well, right there in the back. She was key all along the way, and she's going to find out that I violated a few of their procedures as I go through this and getting this thing done. So let's thank all these partners. So I appreciate Sheila so much giving a lot of the credit to me, but you can see there was a host of folks working on this together. It was a big partnership. So what we hope to achieve today is first I'm going to talk about what we call the west wall. That's the wall right up against here. Michael Sullivan will then talk about the north wall. That's the longer wall that has a lot of the images. And then Connie McCloud, our elder and also head of the cultural office, she'll come up and talk about the significance of the land acknowledgement, the significance of this land. She might add some insight on the art pieces that were done with the tribe. She is like the first person that helped me lay out what we were going to talk about in this project. And then after we do that, we're going to go out into the hallway. There'll be refreshments out there. There's going to be a traditional tribal blessing that you'll all want to be a part of. And then you can just talk to whoever you want. If you want to know more about the paddles, you can talk to Muck. If you want to know more about the ceramic tiles, you can talk to Claudia, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the program, or the flow of the program today. So I will give a short overview of the West Wall, and I'm going to tell that beautiful story, but it was also tragic along the way. And then Michael Sullivan will come up next. Well, the idea for this display actually started quite a long time ago. When I first came to campus in 2015, Milgard Hall was not a thing yet. There was a project on my desk. It was buried down. It was about number 40 or 50 on the UW capital projects list, and it was called the Academic Innovation Center, which kind of morphed over time into this building. So it wasn't, the front of my plate at the time, but I did kind of push it along. It was calling for expansion of the business school and also programs that we didn't even have yet on campus. So I thought we have time to get this building done. But once we decided to make this building out of cross-laminated timber, which we'll call CLT, it went much faster. A lot of people got excited about that process and the concept of sustainable timber use. So the project started going faster. And then when we received the preliminary design funds in 2017 and then the detailed design funds in 2019, it became evident that we better start working on a story of this building. I'm sure you all know a lot of the stories of the other campus building. Every building on campus has its own colorful story from Tacoma's history. And here we're going to have this new building made out of this cross-laminated timber in a sustainable way, and it's not going to have a story. So some of you may remember Josh Knutson. He used to be the vice chancellor for advancement. He and I would talk about this often, that what are we going to do about that story? And we came up with the idea maybe telling the story of timber in Tacoma would be a good story to put in this new building. But until you actually knew the building was going to happen, that was hard to do. It was hard to get any momentum. But then in early 2021, the pandemic had already been going on, but it became evident that we were probably going to get the construction funds for this building. They were trying to stimulate activity and things. Then we knew it was most likely going to happen, so then we got some momentum going. And then once the state did take care or approve those funds, then the project started taking off. So we got down to business and started putting together a story. So the first thing I did is I had heard about Michael Sullivan. He's kind of famous around here, but I didn't actually know him personally. I'd met him once or twice, gone on a walk with him, like the story walks when he talks about the town. So I called him one day and kind of surprised him and asked him if he would like to meet in my office and talk about this timber history story. And he said, of course. So he came to my office, and I think it was just 2 sessions. We put together this storyboard. Now, it's kind of difficult to read, and I don't expect you to read it all. I just want you to see that from the beginning, we put together this thought that we should have a story that would have 4 parts. It would talk about the trees and the resource that was here in the Pacific Northwest and how that attracted people. And then the first people were here since time immemorial. And then Western technology development started. And then the future of cross-laminated timber and maybe more sustainable ways to use our resources like the first peoples did in the first time. So we decided early on that we needed a long story, not a long story, but a complete story of the picture. So that's how the idea started. But again, all we had was a storyboard. We didn't have an idea of where it would be or how long it would be or what we would use. So once the project started, we got an executive committee established that would oversee the design of the building. And that committee, they were lukewarm at first. I guess I can say that comfortably, because they were more worried about getting the building started and getting the construction going. They weren't worried about a timber history display in the lobby. But I think the architect, Kim Yao, who was the principal architect, she liked the idea. And before long, lo and behold, even though the building was still virtual, we got a space dedicated to us to brainstorm in. So you might recognize the space. It's right out in the hallway. This is before, these drawings are before it actually existed, but it was decided we could use that west wall and north wall for the display, and maybe even some of the wall out in the hallway for a land acknowledgement or anything like that. So we got our palette. Now we needed some partners. So Bill Sterrod, who is the current tribal council chair of the Puyallup tribe, is on the advisory board for our campus. So I went to dinner with Bill, talked to him about it. He said, of course, that's a good idea. Go see Connie McCloud, is what he told me. So I went to talk to Connie McCloud, and she was wonderful. She right away told me that if you're going to tell the story, you need to tell the whole story, not just the part about campus, but tell the entire story. And also, you would have to tell the entire story of all the different ways that the tribe and the Salish people here use the resources. They use them for their houses, for transportation, for canoes, for paddles, for baskets, gathering, for tools, everything, and you'll have to tell that whole story. And also, she told me that you'll have to tell the story about history and present day. So I was nervous. That was a lot of story to tell, but we had, 2 walls and some space outside. So that became kind of the footprint for this exhibit out here, was that first meeting with Connie. Now, Connie also asked me to go meet with historical preservation for the tribe, because that's where a lot of the cultural elements are kept. That's who knows all the details, the dates and things like that. So she asked me to meet with Charlotte Bash, and I saw Charlotte here in the audience somewhere today. So my first meeting over historical preservation was with Charlotte, and she told me that, yes, we'll help you, but you need to bring the material to us, and then we'll help review and make sure it is all correct, and we'll put the story together. So that's how we started. Also, Connie introduced me to one of her artists, Michael Hall, who's in the audience here, and we had a meeting with him. In fact, we brought Muck out to the site early. This was in December 2021. We brought Muck to the site when it was only concrete and about 8 of these large timbers, but it just so happened that the 2 timbers that bracket the space where the display is were here. And there is Michael Sullivan and myself, and I'm pointing back there because I can see this on the wall back there, but right here. Muck and myself and Michael Sullivan are standing next to those timbers there, and Muck did a blessing of the space, and he smudged the timbers, and then he was singing a song, and he stopped abruptly. And we said, why did you stop abruptly? He said, we're going to finish that when the project is finished. So you can hear some of that today since the project is finished. We're excited about that. So again, once we had the space now, we had the Puyallup tribe as a partner, we began to look at what images we were going to use. So the first thing that Michael said is we got to talk to Jennifer Kilmer, who is the executive director of the museum next door, and she assured us that she would help us in any way she can, supply visuals or whatever. But Michael said we also need to go to the Whatcom Museum. Jeffrey Jewell is the photo archivist there. So we went up there and looked at all the Kinsey prints. Many of you may know that Darius and Tabitha Kinsey were the most famous Washington, probably photographers of all time. They operated back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and all the remaining negatives of his collection are in that museum. And they're on large glass plates, so you can enlarge those to almost infinite size. And Michael will probably talk a lot more about these images, but I wanted to point out the image on the right because that becomes an important image in our display. That is the backdrop of sections 1 and 2 of the exhibit. Okay, so right behind us here is that wall, and that wall has like a 14-foot by 11-foot copy of one of his prints. So now I'm going to explain the 2 portions here. On the left are the forest, and on the right is the people. So this map is from 1883, and it became kind of the centerpiece of the forest part of the exhibit. It's a beautiful map. If you can look at it later up close, you'll see it's very much detail, and this is before we were so populated. This is actually drawn before Washington was a state. In 1883, we were still a territory, and a lot of the forest hadn't been disturbed. But these were done by Charles Sargent for the Department of the Interior, and he actually did maps like this for Idaho, Montana, all the western states. I don't know how he got all these done. He was a professor at Harvard College, which is now Harvard University. But we were looking for a nice copy of this map. It's probably in the National Archives, but lo and behold, we found one right here in the University of Washington archives. Aliana and Annie in the library here helped me find this one. It was right on our nose all the time. So that became the centerpiece. And then to go along with it, we wanted to somehow show the beauty of the individual trees. The map is one thing to show the expanse, but we wanted to somehow show the beauty of the trees. Now, Michael and I had about 20 visuals for this. That's what we imagined, but the graphic arts firm made us get over ourselves and said, you can't have that many visuals. You need a couple key pieces of art or data that will show this story for you. And then there's QR codes by each of these sections that you can put your phone up there, and it will tell you right now more to come later, but there's going to be a lot more information if you want to know more of the story. But Michael has this friend, Claudia, who I introduced earlier, who is an artist, and she posed the idea of, why don't you just take the real tree bough and put it into a ceramic tile and display that on the wall. That way people could even touch it. And she did that, bless her heart. She actually made 170 smaller versions of these to pass out as gifts when we did the ribbon cutting on this building. So that turned out beautiful, and we're really happy with that part of the exhibit. Now, this was a team effort on the right side of the wall. The right side of the wall, we had historic preservation, we had the language department, we had several local artists. So right away, Anderson Construction hosted us on site. So this is all of us on site. You see Michael, you see me, you see William, Andrea, who's a student but also works in communications. Heidi is in the back. There's Charlotte, there's Muck. Michael Thompson's on there too. So we came out and looked at the space as soon as it got closed in. And that gave us a better idea of how we could put the finishing touches on this. But really, it was a joint effort. Historical preservation did a lot of the work of supplying us the photographs and the background data. But early in the project, when I was visiting with Charlotte Bash, who at the time was the educational liaison, she said there's a book that you can read that is the best source of information on the tools and the materials and all those kinds of things. She said, you need to go read that book, Mark, and educate yourself before you put this information together, which I did. This is the book. It's called The People of Cascadia. It's by Heidi Bowen. And I started using so much of it in the material I was collecting, I got worried one day and thought I should find out who this author is and see how I'm going to credit this in our display. So I found her email, I contacted her. Lo and behold, she's our neighbor. She lives in Hoodsport. She's a woodworker too. She was very interested in our story, and within a few meetings, she became an integral part of our team and actually coordinated the work of that section of the wall. So Heidi's right back here, and she's my friend now because I've been working with her so long. So thank you for being here today, Heidi. She also, there was no photograph of a Puyallup longhouse. So we wanted photographs from talking with Connie. That was an important piece of it. So Heidi is also an illustrator, and she actually, from the oral histories and talking to people from the tribe, drew kind of an engineering. I'm an engineer. This is like an engineering drawing of a Puyallup longhouse, and it's beautiful, and you'll see that out on the display as well. Also, the tribe gave us modern pictures of the tribe in action using wood, and this is from the 2018, I think, Power to the Puyallup Canoe Journey. It took a long time for us to find just the right picture, but I love this picture, and you'll see it out on the wall. Also, for things like cultural artifacts that we couldn't put on the wall, our UWT photographer, Ryan, you might remember Ryan, he went and works for somebody else right now, but he was fantastic. He went out there and worked with Charlotte and myself and Michael and took pictures of key elements, cultural artifacts and elements, and the welcome statue as well to help demonstrate and populate our display out there. We all worked together to get the most appropriate historical photos of the tribe and the Salish people using wood. Here's a fish trap and a kind of a famous picture of a canoe from the turn of the previous century, 2 centuries ago. And then lastly on that section, we needed a map to also put the people kind of in the same space that we had demonstrated earlier with the map of the resources. And we thought we had the right map, and then right at the end, we decided that map wasn't going to work, and I was frantically trying to find a suitable map. And I found this map on the left with the red trim. It was used about a decade and a half ago at an exhibit at the Burke Museum, but it was like 15 or 18 years ago. But I tracked down the artist that made that map, and I contacted her. She emailed me right back, kind of like Heidi did, and she was very interested in our project. So she agreed to modify that map. She had already done all the research on the languages and where the tribes were located. So she modified that map in like 10 days' time. She turned this around because we were kind of desperate to get this done. She made it down to our size of mostly our state. She put some key geographical features. You might see the Puyallup River on the new map. It wasn't on the previous map. She put the mountain on the map. Tacoma is now on the map, and then changed it to the colors of our display. So we were so thrilled. Her name was Deborah Reed. She couldn't come here, obviously, today because she's from Santa Fe, but she did this beautiful job in a very short period of time. So lastly, before I turn it over to Mike, we have some artwork on the wall. Kind of the feature, the focal point of the exhibit is really the artwork, and then the pictures tell the story. Some of the pictures are artwork as well. We have John sitting right there, and he's probably more of an artist than a photographer. John took a picture of a modern, well, not a modern tree, but a tree today, actually August 2022, and that tree is the last picture on the exhibit, and actually the outline you see on the wall behind that tree is pulled out of his picture as well. But this is Muck, who is an artist. He is a wood artist, and I hope that's not offensive, Muck. That's how I think of you as a wood artist. You can do anything with wood, and I've been in his lab so many times, but he kept busy the entire time. He actually made 3 paddles. Everybody thinks he made 2 paddles. He made 3 because 1 split, and he actually made 3 land acknowledgement plaques. 2 of those split before we got one that wouldn't split. But he involved us in the work. I mean, he actually involved us in the work. Here is Gabe helping cut out the panel, which became the traditional cedar paddle on the left. And here's Mark sanding the panel that became the land acknowledgement. I actually got to glue the little supports in the back of the paddles too the day they went on the wall. So he involved us in the work. It was fantastic. And then this was a big night for us. How many of you were here? Oh, lots of you were here. That was a big night. I was so excited. Sheila cut the ribbon with all the dignitaries, but we didn't have our display done. Muck did hurry, though, and got the paddles up so we could tell people about the display to come and they could see the paddles. So he was here. About 12 members of the tribe, many are here today too, did a blessing at that time. But that was an exciting night, but unfortunately the display wasn't finished. So it started coming together at the turn of the year. So in January, these fellows showed up one day. You can see the display is actually on wallpaper, and they hung the wallpaper all in one day, and the narratives and the image captions are on the wallpaper, so they'll be there forever. And then the second day, they came back and they had all the visuals. They already had studs on the back so you could push them into the wall, and they put glue on them, and they made this frame or a pattern and just put them up one by one. They were gone by noon, and the whole display was up, and I was beside myself with joy, except we didn't have the land acknowledgement yet. So, because they kept cracking, but we did get the land acknowledgement on Valentine's Day. It was an exciting day. And Jennifer, this is what I was talking about. Maybe Stanley's in here too. There was only one carpenter on site the day that the land acknowledgement came, so we all became carpenters. I have my carpenter union card. We all became carpenters and got this on the wall and mounted, and it's still there, and we're so excited about that. But that was a big day for us too. Within 5 minutes, the entire building was down in the lobby because of all the noise we were making. So that is the west wall, and now I'm going to turn it over to my friend Michael, who's going to talk more about the north wall. Michael.
Thank you, Mark. And, thank you, Chancellor Lang, and my friends with the tribe, and everybody for being here today. You know, Mark already kind of told this story, but I did get a call from Mark, who I didn't know, And he said, the way he presented it to me was that all our good buildings have great stories. And we're going to build a new building, and it doesn't have a story yet. And talk about a perfect way to hook me in, because I am sort of a storyteller. And together, I think that became our task, was to try to give this building a story, to recognize that a big part of the story is already here. It's just crafting it a little bit. And you know, I've always been, I think the reason I've gotten into history and place is just that almost magical thing about the way that story and place go together. That if you think about it, your memory becomes much more crisp if somehow the story you're hearing can be connected with the place you're at. And when you go to a place, and you've been a million places in your life, but when you go to a place and someone comes along and tells you a story of what happened at that place, you imprint that place more easily. Your memory crisps, it becomes more agile, it fixes that story. So the two things, story and place, go together. And one of the things that I love about this campus is, even though it's not an ancient campus, it's not, Oxford or anything, but in a way it is. Our buildings, the ground we stand on, the events that have played out here, the things that people have done, the footprints they've left on the ground that is our campus today, gives us meaning that's still with us. And for our students that are adding their own story to it, they're not starting from scratch. They're adding their own life story to a layer of story that's already here. And I'm a storyteller of the modern times, and we have to keep in mind, people have been here. Tacomans have lived in this city for thousands of years, and they have walked on this place. And that's what Mark and I were trying to do, I think, and our other partners, is to try to remind people that there is a deep, rich story here. And so it comes that we're dealing with wood and timber, and I want to think about this as timber, because in various parts of the world, it's called the woods, or it's called the forest, or whatever. To me, if you want to imply the scale of forest land that we have, the conifer forests that we have in our part of the world, the greatest conifer forests in the world really are where we live. You call it timber, and that's what I think about. I think about the theme here as being timber. When we started talking about this, it occurred to me that my fascination with story and place was going to be added to with the complexity of timber, because it's a through line that runs through our story. If you will, it's the environmental braiding that runs through the campus that's already here. Story and place, and now we braid in the idea of our natural environment in the form of timber, in the form of woods that people have inventively been reusing and crafting shelter and everything, all our human needs out of the woods around us. And people that live here have been doing it for thousands of years. So, and it now becomes a braided through part of the story of the campus, and that story is contributed to meaningfully by this new building, this new technology that's been around for 10,000 years. So anyway, I just want to quickly spin through the story, the quick story that's on the wall. It's going to be more developed in time. Through the magic of QR codes, we can, and with the library, we can build and add to the story. And since everybody has a screen all the time these days, it means we can add all kinds of components to the story, not just pictures and words, but media and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, we were thinking that after today, it'll be possible for us to record what happens today, to link a QR code to that recording, and anybody coming at any time in the future into this building will be able to, in a way, be able to be here with us. So that's cool. Anyway, so forgive me, I'm in a modern time, and I'm looking at recent history, not old history. As it turns out, this year is the 150th anniversary of the arrival of the railroad, of the Transcontinental Railroad reaching saltwater at Commencement Bay. And that's kind of where my little chapter begins today. This is the oldest known picture we have of downtown, 1873, the year the Transcontinental Railroad arrived. It's just cool to look at timber in the distance, trees in the distance, the woodlands, the trees cut and cleared, and all in anticipation of the coming of the railroad and the birth of a city. You probably all know the story a little bit. Maybe you've read about it. I know I've written about it a lot. Because of labor conflicts and a lot of things, that last leg of the Transcontinental Railroad, that last piece where Abraham Lincoln's dream of a transcontinental railroad, of doing what Thomas Jefferson did in sending Lewis and Clark to the Pacific to reach an ocean he would never see in his lifetime, Lincoln chartered during the Civil War a northern transcontinental railroad that would reach the saltwater of the Pacific on Puget Sound. And that last stretch came down this hill right here, right out the window. This is the prairie line right there. That's where it came down and where it reached the Pacific Ocean, where Abraham Lincoln's dream of an iron band across the continent reached the Pacific here, that close, that intimately close to us today. It runs right by our building, for gosh sakes. That's cool. I was gonna say, most of the workers who were working on the railroad, bringing it up from Tenino during that race in 1873 to reach saltwater, were in a labor dispute. And consequently, most of these tracks, the clearing, the final labor of completing the Transcontinental Railroad was completed by Chinese contract laborers. Sadly, we don't even know their names, but at that time, in 1873, Tacoma was predominantly a city of non-whites. It was a city where the majority of people living here were either indigenous people, or they were part of a gigantic Chinese contract labor workforce that were living here. Think about that for a second, this achievement, if you will, accomplished pretty much by those people. Here's the way the city kind of was sketched in, no camera work here. This just gives you an idea of the Transcontinental Railroad coming into the city and the few buildings. What I want to quickly point out is the fact that it's a wooden city. And for the first generation of people living in our city, we will be a wooden city, a city built with our shelter and our buildings constructed from wood, from the forests, from timber. We also kind of think, I was talking to John Talsback about this just a minute ago. We want to think that, the technology comes whipping in, railroads and steam technology and gigantic mechanical industrial force and all that stuff. The reality is, chainsaw really doesn't get into effect. Steam-driven mechanical saws aren't in effect until after the Second World War. Most of the work that was done cutting trees in the forest was done with hand saws. And the vast majority of it was done by immigrant people coming here, first-generation immigrant people. There was no common language working in the woods, cutting trees. It was the language of hard work that everybody understood. This picture on the right of these, I referred to them once in my piece as gnomon, like the little thing on a sundial. A gnomon is that little line that indicates, that casts a shadow that gives you the time on a sundial. These are a group of Chinese contract laborers that have just cut down this massive Douglas fir. And the same thing, a group of workers on the left starting their job cutting into a tree. By the way, early on, when the sawmills did convert to steam, the big trees weren't preferred. They were too heavy, too hard to handle. Most of the tree cutting was done of the smaller standard trees. And if you look at the forest, you'll see, like in the distance here, the somewhat smaller trees were actually the ones that were cut, more commonly cut, not just cut. And then just the inventive use of the forest, just these, I don't know, just almost artwork kind of photos. This is a Darius Kinsey photograph on the left, and then the introduction of steam locomotives to be able to pull trees out of the wood. Another reason trees weren't cut too big is because the trains just simply couldn't handle the giant big trees. So, and then I want to whip through this kind of quickly, but just point out that our city grew around the product of trees, around the product of the heavy timber that came out of the forest, the big timber that came out of the forest. And this really is our story, this first 100 years, where virtually everything, one way or another, seemed to be connected to trees. It's interesting to me when you look at these photographs, just about everything in the photograph is made out of wood. The boats, the heavy timber frame, mills and structures that were used, the industrial structures that were built, the floorboards, even the sawdust that was used to fuel the steam was all drawn from the forest. And soon after we started cutting the conifer trees, the big Douglas fir and cedars and spruce, hemlocks, industry developed here, industries developed that started to use the hardwoods of the forest because it was logical to take them out as well. And so, you know, the alder and the maple trees that are here quickly and are perfect hardwoods for other industries. And Tacoma starts producing furniture, for one thing, tons of furniture. The Harmon building, the mattress factory, all that's part of furniture making companies. And then the parts that go into building houses and building cities across the country all kind of come out of here. And you can sense the sort of immigrant origins of these workers here in this newel post gingerbread manufacturing house. And then just look at the size of the lumber there in this picture, which you'll see outside as well. In 1889, as Mark mentioned, city really hadn't taken off. The year we became a state, Seattle, Ellensburg, Spokane, and Bellingham all literally burned to the ground. Their phase as wooden cities was pretty well erased by fire, and they had to start over. In Tacoma, we were already building in brick, and you'll find the city kind of take shape in brick on the outside, but timber on the inside, timber-made buildings. And then finally here, just wanted to, by the time we get to the 1920s, our city's already taken shape. You start to see the brick city that's emerging, and this is our neighborhood right here. I put this picture in from 1929 because this coal bunker on the right, this whole area on the right, is where we are standing today. This is the ground where the building is. And if you walk along the back of the Milgard Hall, you'll see the edges of the old coal bunker that's still there, that's still on our site today. Well, anyway, I don't want to run on too long. You probably all know that this neighborhood is sort of preserved because it became neglected after the Second World War. And most of our sturdy buildings here survive because they're sturdy buildings that were built not to burn down. But they really kind of went vacant and for really a generation from 1945 or so all the way up into the 1980s, this neighborhood was pretty well idle, pretty empty. And it was a truly heroic decision to build a new campus in Tacoma, a new public university in the city, and to, instead of clear-cutting someplace or going out to TCC or the suburbs, to go ahead and reoccupy, reuse reusable buildings, reanimate a industrial part of the city, really in a way the first part of the city of Tacoma where that transcontinental railroad comes through, and to reanimate it with a major university. I know I've talked to Ali and the urban studies people who just kind of look at our campus and think, what a laboratory, what a unique opportunity it is to look at a modern academic campus with modern buildings like this and realize how much of it, like Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. How much of our campus today is a in-tune rhyme, a harmony about our past as well as where we are today. And finally, here we are back today with this new building, which is that rhyme. I mean, it is a brick fireproof building with timber posts and beams and floor slabs. It's the same basic materials in the same basic configuration that that the rest of the campus was built in. And when Mark brought to me this question, how do we write a story about this building that gives it the same standing as the other important buildings on the campus? And you know, now that it's all finished, I think we got to the answer to that question, and is do what they did, be what those buildings were, and be a rhyme to what was there. And that really is what this building is. And it just kills me, it cracks me up when you talk to people who come in and they marvel at the environmental smartness of this building and how high tech it is, how modern it is, how inventive, how everything about it is just so cutting edge new. And then you realize, yeah, but you know, a few thousand years ago, basically this building was being built by the same people that were here, by Tacomans that came before us. And so that's the way you make a building fit into a campus, is you find out what works, what's respectful about the way buildings were built in the past, and you do them the respect of duplicating that with the new building. And that's really the way I see the story of New Milgard Hall. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Connie. Also, I want to thank Connie McCloud before she gets up here. The time she and her team at the cultural department spent on doing this is just amazing. And it so influenced, I mean, I think every step, every decision we made in trying to tell the story, so.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Connie McCloud. I have a new title. I'm the Heritage Division Manager and still the Culture Director. And I also oversee language and historic preservation at this time. Our people have lived here for thousands and thousands of years. We understood the relationship between our land, our water, and all things around us. We have a spiritual connection. My name is Sloop Pikel, Cedar Moon Woman, so that as I speak today, my ancestors will know who I am, who my family is, and where I'm from. My mother was Bernice Cecina, Chia Chehalis. Murphy Cecina and Nancy Beckwith were her parents. Dan Cecina and Alice Kitsap were my great-grandparents. Alice Kitsap was the daughter of Chief Kitsap. And during the time of the Indian Wars, she was a young girl, but she traveled with her father. And because he needed to find a place safe for her, because at the conclusion of the Indian Wars, our people were being hung and murdered for their participation, to protect our lands and to protect our people. So she was married into the Cecina family, and she lived to be about 104. She died in 1944. There are still a few stories about her as being a healer, but it was something that would get you into a lot of trouble to do it openly. So when I was 20, nearly 40 years ago, and came to work here, elders would say, I drove the wagon, the car, whatever it took to get to my great-grandparents' home to see them. But they didn't know what happened. Everything was done behind closed doors to protect her and protect her family. But that was what happened during that time, is that our people were not allowed to openly practice their own religion. My father is Merle McCloud. His father was George McCloud. My great-grandfather was Edwin McCloud. His father was John McCloud. John McCloud was a Hudson Bay Company man. There were 3 brothers that came across Canada together. They were from Scotland. One ended up in Swinomish. One came here. They all went to California for the California Gold Rush. So if you go to Mount Shasta and you end up in the city of McCloud, that was one of the brothers. I have relatives there. They all married Indian women. John McCloud actually was somebody who went between the Indian people and the military and those that were fighting against us, trying to help. He had an allotment here along the wetlands of the bay here. But he came with the Hudson Bay Company. So along the way, our people have lived here for thousands and thousands of years. They tell of a time of a great flood. Our people gathered their belongings, their children, their food, their elders, and put them on their canoes and traveled up our sacred river to our sacred mountain. They stayed there until the waters began to recede, and then followed our sacred waters here to Commencement Bay, and along the way establishing their villages. One of the villages is right here at the bottom of the hill, was a large village. Our people gathered here along our waterway to live here, understanding that relationship between themselves and in particular to the world around them. So our sacred cedar trees could live to be 1,200 years old. They were great, great trees. They were considered to be the wisdom of the forest, the tallest, the strongest. They oversaw all of the responsibility. Each tree had a job to do and a responsibility, clear down to the bushes, clear down to the grass, to the medicines that grew in the ground. Our people knew and understood how to move a great cedar tree to build our houses. They did it without today's modern technology or today's modern equipment. They went to that tree and asked permission to become our great homes, our longhouses, to become a sacred canoe. Whenever we went to the forest to gather, we always asked permission and talked to the cedar tree. We're going to gather your bark so that we can make our baskets, to make our clothing, to make our utensils. And then we always said, thank you. I can't imagine what that knowledge and that technology that our people had to move those great cedar trees to the sites where our villages were, and then to construct a longhouse. But they had that knowledge and they had that ability to work together to build them. And our longhouses would stay for hundreds of years. They also knew that the cedar tree repelled rain. It didn't rot. And that's one of the reasons why they built their longhouses out of the cedar tree planks. I get asked all the time if we lived in teepees. And I said, no, we don't live in teepees. They would be hard to move once they got wet. And they would stink, and they would mold and mildew. We didn't live in teepees made out of hide. We made our homes out of cedar. So those are the kinds of things our people knew and understood in that relationship to the world around us. Unfortunately, with the coming of the Europeans and the treaties, and particularly the Transcontinental Railroad, they decided to come here. Olympia didn't have the same deep sea ports. Seattle didn't become larger until the gold rush in Alaska. But the railroad changed everything for our people here. It began the removal of our people from our longhouses, and it was not a simple removal, you go away. They burnt them down. They burnt our canoes, any evidence of our culture, so that our people were also moved around onto reservations. They attempted to remove us completely from our land, that relationship that we've had since the beginning of time. Then came the forced removal of all children into boarding schools and away from their families. It was a time of great loss for our people, our culture, our language. And in just having a brief conversation with Ramona as we entered this afternoon, we are still here. We continue to practice and honor that relationship with our sacred cedar trees and the responsibilities of our forest. We continue to honor and give respect when we gather and fish from the water, gather our clams, to feed our people, to celebrate in our feasts. We always say thank you. It's almost time to go out into the fields and what remains of our prairie. And we had a vast prairie before the Hudson Bay Company brought their sheep and their pigs, and they destroyed a lot of our original grass and plants. But we still have camas out here in the valley and on our prairies. Next month, we'll be able to gather. Next month, then, we'll be able to feed our people camas, our traditional food that continues to grow here. Our people will continue to come together and celebrate the lifeways of our water. This year, the canoe gatherings will come to Muckleshoot. Our pathways were always traveled by our canoes. If we were going to another village, we would announce ourselves with our songs so that they would know who was coming. They would be waiting for us to greet us. And if that we did not announce ourselves, they would know that we were coming as an enemy. And they would prepare themselves to know who was coming. But if you also were somebody who traded, and we traded up and down the coast, clear down to the Columbia River, down to the Dells, where many Native people came together. We would have brought our trade goods, but each village along the way, you would know who was their head families. You would know what were they good at. What would you trade for? You would know who were their children and who all was in our village. You would trade, you would acknowledge their people, because that was your safety route. They would take care of you, they would feed you, they would replenish your supplies, but they would also ensure safe travel through their territory. Otherwise, you may not make it to your destination. Your wealth was determined by how many generations back could you acknowledge their people. That was your wealth. That was how you traded, by knowing your people and where you were going to travel into. So we understood those pathways along the waters, pathways with our people. Our people lived a life that didn't have a lot of hardship because we had plenty of food. But that great change came when they decided to take our lands and create reservations and move us around, take our children. One of the stories my aunts tell about John McCloud and Edmund McCloud being part of the Hudson Bay Company was they had more access to food. My father was born in 1921. And that was still a continuum. Who was going to have access to food and have life a little bit easier? But today we are still here. We continue to take care of our people through our health care, educate our children. We hope to see more of our children here. I have a niece that'll graduate this spring. She's been accepted. She's still deciding where she's going to go, but she's been accepted here. We have many more children along the way. We have a lot of work to do. We're not done yet. There are many, many things and responsibilities the tribe holds very dear to them. Our land, our water, our children. Those are all of our responsibilities. And that is something that the tribe shares and teaches with all of our communities, is not only is those are our responsibilities, but they're yours also, to be the caretakers so that the future generations will know that our waters are clean and drinkable, the food that we eat from the water is healthy and edible, and that the land around us will always be here for the future generations. So we invite you to come share with us the blessing and the viewing of the stories of our community and our people. And so that will follow right now. So thank you for being here.